Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. Tonight I want to share with you guys my mid-month check-in for September. So far this month I have read 5 books completely and I am in the middle of reading 2. So I think that's pretty good progress so far. After I share the books that I have read and am reading, I want to talk to you guys also about a new TBR game that I kind of started for myself. So the TBR game idea is actually what brought me to BookTube almost a year ago. About a year ago, I was innocently minding my own business, scrolling YouTube, when I saw a video from someone who had a picture of I think it was like a Monopoly, knockoff sort of game up here behind her, and she was talking about her TBR game. And I was like, ooh, what is that? That takes reading to a whole new level. And so I clicked on it, watched a little bit on her game, and I was introduced to BookTube. And of course, a whole new world opened up to me, right? So I had not yet made up my own TBR game, but I went ahead and did that this month. I have spent some time organizing these 2 shelves behind me, my TBR shelves. It turns out, well, I actually have it written down. Let me see how many I have on there. It turns out that I have 241 books, or had at the time that I organized them about a week and a half ago, 241 books on my TBR. I have since done some shopping, so I am probably closer to 280. I'll tell you all about it when I get done telling you about my books, but I made a game for myself, kind of excited about it, so I'll share that with you guys. It's a really easy one if you want to do it also. All right, so let's get into the books that I read. So the first book that I want to share, this is Shakespeare's Sisters by Raymie Targoff. I talked a little bit about this last month because I was still reading it, because I did actually start this in August, and I finished it this month, and I did, for the most part, as a whole, I enjoyed this book, and I thought it was a worthwhile read. So just as a refresher, this book talks about 5 different female writers from the time of the Renaissance. She intentionally discusses the timeline of 4 women, but she also talks extensively about Queen Elizabeth I and about her, life of writing or journaling. And so I actually think that, we should include her in here because she's mentioned as a woman writer of the times. I think that this was a good sort of introduction to these women. I wrote down quite a few books I want to look for, or writings, compilations from these women that I would like to look for, but I don't necessarily think this is the best resource for actually studying these women. I kind of use it as just an introduction so that I could go find some other stuff about them. I do plan on reading this through at least one more time. I will probably do that next September for Shakespeare, and when I do that the second time, I'm going to skip around a little bit. The reason why is because rather than telling the complete story of one woman and then moving on to the complete story of another woman, this author tells these stories on a timeline. And so you're jumping from woman to woman to woman to woman depending on what year it is. That can be very frustrating for someone who is not very well versed in these times and the people in the court, right? Because there's lots of, similar names and titles and things. On top of the fact that the author really just does assume that the reader is familiar with the people of the court of Queen Elizabeth I. Now, I am fairly familiar with the people of the court of Queen Elizabeth I, but anything after that, I'm very not familiar with, right, for those next couple of 100 years. And so it did get a little muddy for me once Queen Elizabeth I passed away. So I think when I go back and read it next September, I'm just going to skip and read through each chapter on one person, finish that, go back, read through each chapter on the second person, and do it that way, and see if I get a little bit more out of this reading than I did this time. Another thing I was thinking of as I was reading through this is I think that the author's intention was to present these 4 women as, trailblazers and maybe even women to look up to. But in almost every case, they left their husbands and children in order to do what they wanted to do. Especially regarding the children, I don't feel like they fulfilled their, years of mothering young children before they set off to go and find that room of their own in which to write. And so that did bother me. I'm a writer, and so I have sort of, put aside the amount of time, attention, emotion, whatever that I could be devoting to writing so that I can raise my children. And I know that one day I will have that opportunity to spend more time in my writing as my kids grow up and, you know, start doing their own thing and don't really need mom around as much, or they're not around as much. But right now, because I have children, that time needs to be devoted to those children. And so I guess it just did rub me the wrong way. And I'm not willing to just say, well, it was the times. I'm just really not willing to go there with these women. There's a time for everything, and they just jumped ahead of their time, in my opinion. So I don't know, I wasn't impressed. But that is Shakespeare's Sisters by Rami Targoff. Not a bad read, just not an awesome one, right? I gave that one 3 stars. All right, next up was another 3-star read. This is The American Queen by Vanessa Miller. Now, this is a book that I chose because I am doing a project where I'm going to do a response video on 5 inspirational fiction books. Several people have asked me to do a video about my issues with inspirational fiction. And so anyway, I decided to read a few and kind of make sure that I'm not basing my judgments on older books, but instead on things that are actually in the bookshop right now. So anyway, I've explained all that before. You guys have heard that. So I read this and I started off thinking, wow, this is going to be a beautiful book. The way the first part of this book is written is beautiful and very lyrical, and it just had a lot of like good, rich language. Okay. But as it went on, I got really bored with it. And that sort of feel just kind of stopped. I feel like it seems to be one of those things that was just clearly written from like start to finish, kind of straight through, where maybe the author started off very, very into it, and then somewhere about 2/3 or so in, maybe even halfway in, just got kind of like, okay, I got to finish this thing up. That's just kind of the feel I got about it. I don't feel like as much time and just craft was spent on the second half of the book as on the first half of the book, as far as, the language. The story was pretty, the actual plot, I guess, of the story was pretty consistent throughout, but just the way it was told was very different from, halfway to the end than it was in the first half. I got bored with it. I feel like the author got bored with writing it and just started plodding monotonously along until the end. The whole story is kind of allegorical, but it got kind of cutesy after a while, and I don't know. Anyway, the story is of a group of people, and it's actually based on a true story, but it's a group of people who were newly emancipated, former slaves, newly freed, and they want to leave the plantation that they're on and go start a new colony for themselves, I guess, called the Happy Land. And so it's the story of them doing that. I think about like maybe 35 to 50-ish, somewhere in there, people actually leave the plantation, but by the time they get to the colony that they're going to end up at, which I believe is in North Carolina, I think they started like in Georgia, maybe Alabama, I can't remember, one of the two. And then they go to North Carolina. And along the way, they collect more and more people. So they end up settling with like 250 people. And so it just tells the story of them, it tells a little bit of the story of them there on the plantation, having been freed, yet just not knowing what to do, right? Just not knowing where to go. And then a way is made, they're able to leave. And then it tells the story of those travels. And then it goes into their life in that new land that they have been able to purchase for themselves and start building into a community. It's a cool story, and it would be cool to sort of look into the real story behind it. I do feel like I need to give a little bit of grace where I may not in other circumstances, as far as the way that the story is told and, the things that I have brought up, because I am dealing with a culture and a history that I know very little about. And so some of what I'm not enjoying may be actually done on purpose and may be the voice of the story, right? So I am definitely willing to make that, concession. But I think overall the author's loss of interest contributed to my loss of interest, and I just kind of came away feeling kind of blah, disappointed. I was counting down the pages until I was finished. So I did give it a 3, because the parts of that I enjoyed I thought were really special, and I really enjoyed them. All right, next up was a 4-star read. This was The Haunted Hotel by Wilkie Collins. And I am kind of on this little mission to read everything that he ever wrote. So I read this. And I did enjoy it. It's classic Wilkie Collins. Even though the ending is very abrupt, and even though there's really not any explanation for the ultimate creepy event that happens in this story, even though we don't really even understand some of the roles of the characters, and even though there are enough plot holes to crumble the palace turned hotel that this story is about, he's still one of my favorites, what can I say? So in The Haunted Hotel, there's a hotel. It used to be a palace. Now it's a hotel. There's sinister people involved. A whole family ends up going to the hotel. Bad things happen. Like, I can't tell you a whole lot or I'll be giving it away, but it's a pretty basic story. But the thing that I do like about this story, and that thing about Wilkie Collins, he just has that way of telling stories in a unique form, right? Sometimes you get multiple narrators. In this story, there was always a third-person narrator, but the way that it was told, it switched around where it seemed like you were hopping narrators. Although it never went into first person. It's hard to explain. But the other thing that I think is really neat about the form of this book is the entire portion of this story that is hidden from the reader ends up being told near the end of the story in the form of a manuscript for a play. I thought that was really genius. I think that maybe I didn't even realize I wasn't being told an entire portion of this story until it started being told, but he had one character write it out in a manuscript for a play, hand it to another character, and then we get to experience that character reading through it, and we learn all of the things that were happening throughout this story behind the scenes as it went on. And so it was a pretty fantastic way of doing the story. I think he's a genius. Really like Wilkie Collins a lot. Next up, I read Little House in the Big Woods with my daughter. So we did start back to our homeschool a few weeks ago, and each day I read for at least a half an hour with each of my 4 youngest children. I'm only schooling the last 4 of my kids now. I have 9 kids, and this is my 22nd year of homeschooling, so I have about 7 years left. But each afternoon, each of those 4 kids gets a half an hour, and we go in my room and we read together. And so my youngest daughter and I had been reading Little House on the Big Woods for quite a while. We would just read a chapter a day usually. And so we did finish that. And it was a special story. I've read this story so many times. If you have not read the Little House on the Prairie series by Laura Ingalls Wilder, it is the storytelling and her description of everything, of the way it looks, of the way the people are, of how it felt to eat this thing or to experience this thing or to watch. It's amazing. She was just a fantastic storyteller with so many beautiful words. I would highly recommend that you get a hold of the Little House on the Prairie series. They are so well worth it. But yeah, we enjoyed that. So we are on to Little House on the Prairie now. This one was Little House in the Big Woods. Now we're on Little House on the Prairie. And that's the second in a series of, I don't know how many there are. What, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 8, maybe 7 or 8 in the series. So check them out. All right, and then my final finished read was A Midsummer Night's Dream by William Shakespeare. This was my read for Shakestember. I had not read anything by Shakespeare for a really long time. If you guys haven't seen my Shakespeare Journey video I just put out a couple of days, make sure and check that out. It talks a little bit more about this story and just Shakespeare in general. But I did enjoy reading through this. It was fun and funny and just as wonderful as I remembered. So I'm really glad that I did this. I'm not sure. I was thinking about picking up another Shakespeare play this month, but I'm probably not going to get to it. I'm not sure. So I did enjoy this. I'm glad I participated in Shakestember. All right, and then I am in the middle of reading 2 books. One of them I will probably finish this evening or tomorrow. The other one I am reading over slowly and have decided to take a little break from. I'll get to that in a second. So what I am currently on this is called Black Rabbit Hall by Eve Chase. This is something that I picked up when Lindsay and I did our trip out to Fort Smith. If you guys saw that video, I did a book haul and just kind of made a little video of us hanging out in Fort Smith and all the neat things that we saw there. But I am almost done with this. I'm like 288 and it's like 371, right? So I'll probably finish this evening. I had found this book because I was actually looking for something else by Eve Chase, which my bookstore did not have. I went into Barnes & Noble. But when I was looking through the shelves, and this was the only book of hers that was on our shelves actually, but the front of it says that it's for fans of Kate Morton and Daphne du Maurier. And I was like, well, hey, gotta pick that up because those are 2 of my favorite authors. So it is a gothic story with the old house and the old lady and the young lady and the mystery and the love interest, a mystery to solve, you know, that kind of thing. I love that kind of a story. Modern gothic is what I like to call it. I don't know what it's really called, but that's what I call it. So being almost 300 pages into it, almost finished with it, yes, I do think it has a Kate Morton feel, and yes, I do think that there's a Daphne du Maurier ish. But I think that this author probably has a little bit of work to do before she kind of, you know, could be put up there on that same level. I am getting a little bit bored with the story right now. So this book was a 5-star read for me clear up until about page 200 or shortly after, when the author just dropped a piece of information that took away all sense of mystery, answered the questions for you, and was a complete cop-out. Very frustrating. And so I've spent the last 88-ish pages kind of annoyed and kind of ready for the story to be done. If it doesn't take a really awesome turn at the end of the story, I'm going to be highly disappointed with this book because it started off so good. And what the author did by kind of giving this information, like it dropped it down to a 3 right away. It was definitely a cop-out. Really frustrated with, I'm really frustrated with it. You pretty much get the general gist of the mystery from the beginning if you've, you know, read a few stories like this, but it's always fun to see how it's going to play out, right? But she just kills it at about page 200. So yeah, I'll give you an update at the end of the month, but I'm not happy. All right, and then the other book that I'm in the middle of, this is the biography of Samuel Pepys by Claire Tomalin. And I read to about, I'm on page 73. And then I decided to go ahead and wait until I have a chance to read some from his actual diary. So Samuel Pepys, if you're not familiar, was a guy who lived in the 17th century. It says he was a civil servant. I'm not exactly sure what that was. He like a city councilor? Was he like, you know, on some kind of board of directors for the city of London? Like, I'm not exactly sure what his role was there. And we may not even have got to that yet here in the story. But he wrote a diary. And the interesting thing is he only really faithfully kept this diary for like 18 months. But the 18 months that he kept it was during the Great Fire of London and the plague. And so he documents a lot of information from that time. And from what I understand, a lot of the news was being censored at the time. And Pepys had already actually walked through that in younger years of the news, I guess, for lack of a better term, being censored. And so when some of this other stuff, you know, political things were happening, he was like, you know what, I'm going to keep a diary and preserve some of this, you know, history of us. And so anyway, he only did for just a short time. But like I said, that short time was a very important time. And much of what we know about 17th century life and these events in London comes from the diary of Samuel Pepys, just a regular guy, right? He was just writing stuff down. I think that is just incredible. And it encourages me to want to keep a diary and keep track of world events. Which is hard because the world events right now are hard, right? But who knows? Maybe they were really hard for Samuel Pepys too. So if he could do it, I could do it. But anyway, so I read, like I said, about 70-ish pages, and then I decided to go ahead and set it aside. I'm going to read some of his diaries first and then come back, because where I left off is right about the place where he starts in on his diary. So I think it's a great place to stop and get a little bit of you know, his voice, and then come back and finish this off. Now, the reason why I chose the Samuel Pepys book is it came up in my TBR game, which I'm going to tell you about here in a second. It was cool that I did choose that one in the TBR game because it's also on my list of things that I wanted to try to get through for Historathon Quarter 3, which ends at the end of this month. So that has been good. I got to get a little bit of something else read for Quarter 3. All right, so here's my TBR game. So what I did was I downloaded the Libib app, and I heard about that from one of you guys. I was watching some videos trying to figure out like how do people organize their libraries in an efficient way, because what I have been wanting to do is have a way where I just on my phone I've got a list of every book that I have, right? In every edition, a picture of the cover, all that. I go bookshop hopping a lot. It's one of my favorite hobbies. I'm always out looking for books. Thrift shops, yard sales, regular bookshops, little free libraries, whatever. I love to add books to my TBR shelf as well as to just my home library for the future. And so I often come back with the same book, right? Because I'm like, do I have this? I don't know. Might as well pick it up just in case. And so I wanted a way to organize that. And so I downloaded this Libib app. I'll put a link in the description if you guys are not familiar with that. It allows me to scan the barcode of every book. Most of them pop up. If they don't pop up, you can put books in manually. It is a really efficient way of organizing your books. I love it. And then tomorrow I'm actually going book shopping with one of my good friends. And so I'll have all my books on my phone and I'll be able to do a better job of picking out the books that I don't already have. So like I said, these back here are my TBR shelves. I have organized them in alphabetical order by author's last name. I've organized them in different ways over the years, but that's how I decided to organize them this time because it works well with the TBR game that I'm going to do. So what I did was first I went through these books. I took out everything that I wanted to unhaul, which actually only ended up being a few books, surprisingly. So I'm getting better at picking things that I know I'll actually read and not being so spontaneous. And so then what I did, I put them all in the Libib app, and then I went through and I wrote them all in this journal, okay? I wrote them out and I numbered them. There's several pages here of these books. Like I said, there ended up being 241 books, okay? So I wrote them all in here, and then what I did was I got these little peepers. There are 241 squares in this cup that says, I like long romantic walks down the stationery aisle. Super cute. Anyway, I put all of those little numbers in the cup, right, to draw them out. A good way to get these numbers is if you go on and you Google like something like math number charts 1 through 100, math number charts 1 through 200, and, you know, change the size to the size you want it, and then it will print these off, and all you gotta do is cut them out, so you don't have to write on all of them. So that's nice, and they're all the same size and all that. So they're all in here in this cup, and so what I'm doing is at the beginning of each month, I'm drawing out numbers. So I'll pick out a number, I'll look in the book. So say I pick out, you know, number 213, and then I look in my journal and find out which book is number 213. Samuel Pepys by Claire Tomlin. So I grab that off the shelf, and then I do this up until 1,000 pages. But I'm giving myself a little grace spot of like 50 pages, right? If I'm within 50 pages of 1,000, then that's a stop. So my goal is each month I either have to read these books and decide to put them in my, you know, personal collection, or decide to unhaul them or DNF them. Basically, they have to leave these shelves at the end of the month. If it's a book that I know I'm going to want to keep in my collection, I know I'm going to want to hold on to, but for whatever reason, I'm just not ready to read it, like the Samuel Pepys, I have started, but I do need to read some other things first before I come back to it. I can go ahead and go put it in my permanent collection or over here on my reading cart. I just cannot put it back on that TBR shelf. So that's what I will be doing with the Samuel Pepys book, because I know that I am going to want to come back to this, and I'm probably going to want to keep it in my permanent collection for just future referencing, right? He's just one of those guys that fascinates me. I really hope his biography doesn't ruin him for me. If you know stuff, don't tell me. All right, and so anyway, that's what I did for this month. So I got 3 books before I got up close to 1,000 pages. The second book that I chose was The Guest Book by Sarah Blake. Now, I have had this book on my TBR for several years. I chose this book not really knowing too much about what it's about, but I chose it based on the only other book I've read by this author called Grange House. I loved that book so much. It does have a gothic-y feel to it, and just, it was kind of atmospheric. I don't know, I really loved it. Now, I did read it in 2017, so maybe my tastes have changed by then. I don't know that I necessarily want to recommend it until I read it again, but I did love it in 2017. And so I put this book, the only other one that she had out at the time as far as I know, I put it on my wish list. I ended up getting it, and then it's just been sitting on my shelf for a long time. Partly because this story is almost 500 pages long, and even reading the back of it, I'm not getting a full idea of what it's about. It says it's a family saga, illuminates the great divide, the gulf that separates the rich and the poor, the black and the white, the Protestant and the Jew, spans 3 generations, definitely examines the life and legacy of one unforgettable family as they navigate the social and political. It's just one of those things where they're basically saying this is a story about a family. And I don't know, it just doesn't sound super like packed full of jam, right? And so I don't know if I'll get to it. And I am okay, you know, unhauling it if I need to, because it shouldn't have sat on my shelf that long unread. And honestly, I am all about serendipity. So if it came back to me, I would be like, yay, okay, maybe I'm supposed to read it. So I may get to it. It's not likely though, right? There's only like 10 more days in the month. So I'm going to say it's probably going to get unhauled, but we'll see. Whew, I had to change angles for that one. I didn't realize how much that sun was coming in. I don't know how long I've been blinding you all, so I apologize. So the last book that I drew for that TBR game is Drawn from New England by Tasha Tudor. See if I can, there we go. Tasha Tudor is one of my very favorite artists. She lived most of this last century, actually. She was born in 1915 and lived to be pretty old, but she illustrated some of my favorite stories. I have several books of hers that are just really treasures. And so this is a short book, right? I'll probably read this for, you know, Shorty September. I haven't done anything for Shorty September yet, although I wonder if A Midsummer Night's Dream could count. I'll have to look that up. But it's basically just a little story of her life. It has a lot of photos in it. It just kind of tells the story of her life and her creative career. She was like kind of like a homesteader, herbalist. She lived in this little cabin. She lived in an old-fashioned way. You can see here in this photo, she liked to dress in an old-fashioned way. So she was born in 1915, assuming she's, you know, my age there. This is what, 1960? So obviously, right, she likes to dress in this old-fashioned way and live in an old-fashioned way. And I don't know, I just think she's a really neat person. So if you know stuff about Tasha Tudor that I don't want to know, don't tell me either. I just want to live in my delusions. This one shows her outside. There we go. So you may be familiar with her, but yeah, I'm going to go through that, and then maybe I'll do a little video on Tasha Tudor and show some of my book collection that I have of things that were illustrated by her, and talk about it a little bit, do like a, you know, biography video. So that is my mid-month check-in so far, having a good reading month, which is good because next month for October, which is Victober, and I'm super excited about that, but I am going to be out of town for quite a while, like up to maybe 12 days I'm going to be gone in October. A huge chunk of Victober I will be busy, so which is fine, busy doing great things, but I probably won't get as much reading done in October as I usually do, so I'm kind of trying to get a bunch done here in September to sort of make up for it. All right guys, hope you're having a great day. I will see you soon. Bye-bye.